Hello, this is Eli Shaubi. We will today be doing the seventh chapter of Ilchot Shehita, the chapter dealing with the various illnesses and regarding punctures in the lung. This is a very relevant chapter for the laws of kashrut that are relevant both theoretically and practically today, as the lung is the primary case of terefot that we deal with in kashrut today. Um, Before I begin, I'll give a short introduction as to how lung works and how the respiratory system in general works in all vertebrates. So also in the cow, but also in humans. Um, so first of all, again, for those looking at the YouTube channel, and I suggest for those listening to the podcast, I suggest looking at the YouTube channel because I'll be using a lot of images that will be helpful in understanding the halachot. So first of all, this is a picture of this is the human lung, but it's not very different from how the bovine lung works either. Um, Essentially, the lung is inside, right? We see here the trachea, right, which we've been talking about for a while now. The trachea goes down and ends in the lung. Now, the lung is composed is sits inside, it's in the thoracic cavity, right, which is a hole in the chest that contains the lung, the heart, and a few other things. It's separated with the diaphragm, which then on the other side of the diaphragm is the stomachs, liver, and so on and so forth. So in this part uh, of the cavity of the beta halal, as the Chachamim talk say, we have the trachea, which goes into the lung, and when it reaches the lung, it splits into uh, bronchi. Bronchi are these these smaller branches which bring the oxygen that the human breathed in and bring them to the lungs. Um, these bronchi will then split off into smaller bronchioles. And you see a little bit here, it's splitting off even a little bit more. And will keep on splitting until it reaches the end, which are a thing called alveola. Here is a picture of how it looks in the human lung, right? So here it splits off into two, one to the left lung, one to the right lung, and then from there it continues to split off. And at the end, you have these alveola, which are these like grape cluster looking things, and the the uh, the air carrying the oxygen meets with blood and helps in bringing the oxygen to the blood, which will then be circulated to the entire body. Um, that is how breathing works in general. Now, if you look again at the lung sits in this sac called uh, the plural sac. Okay, the plural sac you can see here on the outer layer of the lung has these is the outer lining of the lung and is what basically what holds the lung in place. Very much like we saw regarding the heart, which also has a sac of its own. So here we have the sac of the lung, and the sac of the lung has two parts. It has a parietal pleura, which is this area, this membrane, which is closer to the lung itself. Okay, and then we have after that the the visceral pleura. I apologize. The visceral pleura, which is the part closest to the lung, and then the part farther away is the parietal pleura. Okay, that's these two pink lines and like brighter pink lines, and then this darker pink, which is in the middle, is called the pleural cavity. Okay, and we have these two membranes, and in between the pleural cavity, which contains in it pleural fluid, um, which is useful in allowing us to breathe and uh, various lines of the lung to move back and forth, the fluid allows it to do so. Okay, and then so this parietal pleura, which is on the outer end of the lung, is what is closest to the rib cage. Right here, you can see it on the left lung, or actually, this would be the right lung because it's from the perspective of the human, right? So even if it's our left, it's the human's right. So that's the right lung, right? So here we see the rib cage with all the various ribs with flesh across it, right? Uh, and that would be next to the parietal pleura. Okay, that's my general introduction to how the lung and breathing in general works. This information will be useful as we look at the halachot in this chapter. הלכה א', שני קירומות יש על הריאה. אם נקב זה בלא זה, מותרת. ואם נקבו שניהן, okay, there are two membranes on the lung. If one of them is punctured without the other being punctured, then it is permitted, right? But and if both of them are punctured, then it is a terefa, right? So we saw that there were 8 types of terefot, and one of them is the nekuva, right? Is a puncture. We saw the punctures regarding all of the other organs, and now we're going to be dealing with the right? So a lung that is punctured is a terefa. And in order for it to become terefa, it needs to be punctured in both membranes. I believe this to be referring to these two, the parietal pleura and the visceral pleura. These two membranes that together make up the pleural sac. I will note that the Yochai Makbili version does not agree with me and thinks that that all of this is just the upper pleura, the upper membrane, the kurum elyon, and that the lower membrane is referring to at the end of the alveolar sacs, which also there's a membrane, though I do not think that is correct. I think that this is more accurate and that these two membranes, they make up they are the two membranes that Rambam talked about here. And I'll explain why I don't think that their explanation is correct in the future. So the main point is here. It says that they are on the lung, and that other one is not on the lung. It's inside the lung, and I don't think that is correct. So there are two. Okay. So אפילו נגלד הקירום העליון כולו והלך לו מותרת. And even if the entire upper membrane was like removed and disappeared, this is still permitted so long as the lower one is still there, because the puncture needs to go through both. והקנש ניקב מן החזה ולמטה במשהו טרפה, وهو مقام שאינו ראוי לשחיטה בקנה למטה. And the trachea that is punctured from the chest and downwards, even just a little bit, is also a terefa. And this is from the location that the trachea is no longer fit for slaughter, right? As we saw earlier, the border of the trachea is from the arytenoid cartilage up top all the way until the edge of the lung at the bottom. And that a puncture in the trachea is only from a majority of the trachea. Once, however, we pass the edge of the lung, then it is no longer about being a majority of the trachea, but even just a little bit of the trachea. הלכה ב' התחיל בשחיטה ושחט כל הקנה, ואחר כך נקבה הריאה, ואחר כך גמר שחיטה, הרי זו טרפה. הואיל ונקבה קודם גמר שחיטה, וכן כל כיוסה בזה. If he began in slaughtering and he cut the entirety of the trachea, and then the lung was punctured, and then he finishes the slaughter, this is a terefa, since it was punctured prior to completing the shahita. And so to anything like this, right? So the shahita in the behema, and the domesticated animal, needs to cut both the trachea and the esophagus. So here, even if he finished the entirety of the trachea, but he didn't finish both of them yet, and then a puncture happened in the lung before he was able to complete the esophagus, complete cutting the esophagus, then this would be a terefa, since the puncture occurred prior to cutting the esophagus. Of course, this halakha cannot be relevant regarding a bird, because with a bird, only one of the simanim needs to be cut, and as soon as he cuts the trachea, then he has completed the shahita. Hold on one second. I apologize. אוקיי. הלכה ג' אחד מסימפוני ריאה שניqaf, אפילו לחברו טרפה. One of the simponim, simpon is like a pipe, right? So here this is referring to either the bronchi or the bronchioles, one of these splitting offs of the trachea that is in the lung. So one of these that has been punctured, even if it is punctured into one of the other bronchioles or bronchioles, then it is a terefa, meaning even if the puncture goes through one, but there's another one that is right there next to it, so it kind of seals it. That is not considered. That is still a terefa. ועלה קירום במכה ונסתם הנקב, אינו כלום. And a lung that was punctured and a clot came up on the place that it was hit and sealed the puncture is not considered to be anything, meaning the clot does not make it also does not count as closing the puncture, and it remains a terefa. נקבה האום של הריאה, אף על פי שדופן סותמתה, terefa. Okay, here too, I need to give a little introduction. So we spoke about how the lung generally works in all animals. Now I'll talk a little bit specifically about the lung of a cow. The lung of a cow looks like this for those looking at the YouTube. It has basically there's a right lung and a left lung. These two parts make up the lungs, and they're divided into sections, which are formed by the pleural sac. So here we can see in the right section has 4 lobes, and the left lung has 3 lobes, which our Hachamim gave various names to. There's a little bit of a difference between how modern anatomy defines lobes from how Hachamim defined the lobes. I'll first give the modern scientific explanation, and I'll explain how that matches what our Chachamim described. In the cow, we have, according to our modern science, we have on the right lung, which is our left, right? So so what we see on the left is called the right lung, because we're talking about from the perspective of the person who has the lung, and then what is on our right would be considered the left lung. So let's begin with the left lung, which is on our right. So on top we have a cranial lobe, and on the bottom we have our caudal lobe. The caudal lobe is this very large lobe that we see on the bottom, and on the top we have the cranial lobe, which is divided into two parts, which you can kind of see with this little crevice in the middle. The top part is called the cranial part of the cranial lobe, and the bottom part is called the caudal part of the cranial lobe. Okay, so we have the cranial lobe and the caudal lobe. And the cranial lobe has two parts. So together that makes up three, or it makes up two lobes. First lobe, which has two parts, and the second lobe, right? So together they make up three. On the right lung, we also have a cranial lobe and the caudal lobe, right? The caudal lobe is also this large part. Even though we have one other part called the middle lobe, which is here in between the cranial lobe and the caudal lobe, which does not exist in the left lung. So the right lung has one lobe more than the right lung. Sorry, the right lung has one lobe more than the left lung. Now, our Hachamim called these on the top, they called them unot. And the bottom one, they called hare'ah. So the large lobe, which is the caudal lobe, they called hare'ah, from like mother, which means the primary or the largest lobe, since it is significantly larger than the other ones. The unot, on the other hand, are the ones on top. The left lung has two unot, and the right lung has three unot. Right, so they consider the two parts of the cranial lobe to be two separate lobes. In addition, there's also in the middle this accessory lobe, also called an intermediate lobe, which kind of is its own thing, standing on top, which we won't deal with so much in this chapter, but we'll talk about it a little bit in the next chapter. Okay. So So if the caudal lobe, right, the bottom, the larger lobe of the lung were punctured, even though the dolphins, even though the wall seals it, this is a terefa. Okay, so again, looking at the picture, so the rib cage, right? Imagine the rib cage beginning up top where the lung is beginning, and it becomes wider as it goes down. Okay, so the top part is the rib cage is rather thinner, and at the bottom it's wider. Okay, so the bottom, it will not necessarily be sealed very well by the wall, but it can still be sealed. But since the sealing of the wall does not seal it very well, the sealing is considered to be temporary, and therefore is not considered sufficient to seal any sort of puncture in the in the caudal lobe. Okay. ואם נקבה במקום חיתוך האונות שלה, והוא המקום שרובצת עליו, כשרה. But if the puncture is in the place where the unot, or the other lobes, the upper lobes, are divided, meaning on the border between the and between the caudal lobe and the middle lobe, or the caudal lobe and the cranial lobe, or between the border between any of the lobes, if the puncture is exactly there, which is the place where these upper lobes are sitting on top of it, meaning on top of the caudal lobe, then this is keshira, since the lobes will seal each other. הלכה ד' במה דברים אמורים? ושסתם מקום הנקב של האונוס בשר. אבל אם נסמך הנקב לעשם, אינו מרן. ואם היה נקב האונוס דבוק בעשם ובבשר, מותרת. Okay. So what case are we talking about? We're talking about a case where when we have this puncture in the unot, in the upper lobes, that what is sealing that puncture is flesh. But if what is sealing the puncture is bone, then the bone does not protect. Right? We saw this also in previous chapter, that there are various things that if we have a puncture and something is sealing it, that this makes it considered to not be punctured and makes it permitted. However, certain things which are hard are not sufficient for sealing, and a bone here is also included in that, right? So since the bone does not protect from this puncture, it is not considered to be a seal for it. A picture, you can understand what we're talking about. So this picture that we saw, right? So we have the lung, and the lung, some parts have flesh and some parts have bone, right? So if the puncture is on a part of the lung that is opposite a bone, then that is what we're talking about. That would be prohibited. If it's opposite a part that is with flesh, then that would be permitted, right? So that you can see that in this picture. ואם היה נקב האונוס דבוק בעשם ובבשר, מותרת. But if the puncture that is on the upper lobes is stuck to both bone and flesh, then it is permitted. Okay, now first of all, I want to talk a little bit about what it means for it to be stuck. Now, so we spoke a little bit about these, about the pleural sac and these various, and these two membranes. Now, occasionally, if a puncture occurs in one of these, membranes, or in the membrane, the pleural sac, or various illnesses that can occur, whether from bacteria like bronchitis or tuberculosis or something like this, or cancer, or various other types of diseases, or some trauma like like a stabbing or some sort of like hard hit that the animal or human suffered. These can cause various problems in the lung, and because of these problems, sometimes adhesions are formed which connect the lung to the chest wall, right? So again, looking here, we see the lung, the pleural sac with its two membranes with the pleural cavity in the middle, and then the chest wall, right? The chest wall, which is formed by the rib cage. And an adhesion can be formed. An adhesion is like this fibrous type of connective tissue, which will seal a puncture, but it will not necessarily be a puncture. It can be other things as well. Although some of our Chachamim did think that it will always be a result of a puncture, though according to Rabbeinu that is not the case. And they will connect the lungs with the chest wall. This is called a sircha. A sircha can also, it doesn't necessarily have to connect to the chest wall. It can also connect from the various lobes of the lung. as we will see also. But these are signs that our Chachamim use to see whether the lung is punctured or not. So when we see that it is davuk ba'esem ubasar, that's talking about it having a lesion. Okay, for example, here is a picture where you can see adhesions. For example, here's the lung. You can see it. You can see the adhesions that are connecting all along the rib cage in this animal. Right, these fibrous tissues are called adhesions. Okay. הלכה ה' האום של הריאה שנמצאת סמוכה לדופן, בין שהעילת צמחים בין שלא העילת צמחים, חוששים לה שמא נפרה. Okay. So the caudal lobe, right, the bottom lobe, which is bigger, that is found to be stuck to the wall, or right, the chest wall. Now by stuck here, we mean that there are adhesions. Regardless of whether simachim, I'll talk about these in a second. Simachim are like some sort of little hairs or something like this. Regardless of whether there are simachim or not, we suspect that the caudal lobe might have been punctured. Okay. Now, so what are these simachim? So there are various diseases that can occur in the lungs. One of these is one of the primary diseases in the lungs is called pulmonary effusion, which occurs when we have too much fluid in the pleural cavity, right? So we talked about the pleural cavity that exists between the two membranes, and that cavity contains a little bit of fluid that allows for smooth breathing to occur. Now, sometimes too much fluid will enter into that cavity, and that fluid can either be more of the pleural fluid, or it can be external fluids, such as blood, which might come from a stabbing or something like this, or pus, or even urine, various fluids that shouldn't be there, that are brought there by various illnesses. Specifically, in the case of pus, which is called pleural empyema, is a type of disease, a type of pulmonary effusion. In the process of forming of the pus in the pleural cavity, there are some fibrous septa, which are like these little hairs that start forming pus pockets, which is the disease. These septa is what is referred to as the semachim here. Okay, so regardless of whether these septa are seen or not, right? And the reason that it doesn't matter whether we see these or not is because if there are these semachim, then it is a sign that pleural empyema is starting to occur in this animal. But there are other types of pulmonary effusion that can occur that do not have pus, but rather, like I said, have either blood or urine or even just more pleural fluid. And in those cases, there wouldn't be these semachim, right? These semachim are peculiar to the case of pus. So regardless of whether we see it or not, we see them or not, we still suspect that it might have been punctured, since pus is not the only form that we are suspicious of. Okay, so what do we do in order to check? So we need to check to see if, because we suspect, we need to check to see if there is a puncture. How do we check? מפרקים אותה מן הדופן, ונזהרים בה שלא תנקב, ואם נמצאת נקובה או נמצא בדופן מכה במקום הנקב, תולים במכה ואומרים, אחר שחיטה נקרבה, כשנפרקה מן המכה, ואם אין מכה בדופן, ביד שנקב זה בריאה היה קודם שחיטה וטרפה. Okay, so how do we check if we are suspicious? If so we remove the lung from the chest wall, right? We said that the chest wall is stuck to the wall because of all these adhesions. So we go with our hand and we remove the lung from the chest wall. And while we do this, we are careful to not puncture the lung. Now we check the lung. If we find that it is punctured, then we look at the wall, and we see that if it had at the chest wall, if we see that there's a hit in the portion in the place of the puncture, then we assume that this hit that this puncture is a product of a hit, and we say that this occurred after the slaughter, and that the puncture occurred after the slaughter, and that it happened when it was removed from the hit, meaning that we assume that it was when we removed the lung from the chest wall that at that point the puncture was formed. It was formed as a product of our attempt to remove it from the chest wall. And therefore, we say that it is kshera. But if there is no hit in the wall, right, which was what we were careful to try and prevent, if we don't see any hit in the wall, then we know that this puncture that we see in the lung existed prior to the shehita and is therefore terefa, right? So, right, to sum up, so we remove the lung from the wall. We check to see if there is a this hit. If we see the hit, then it is keshera. If we don't see a hit, then it is terefa. This halakha is one of the primary halachot that there is significant disagreement about. Maran, Rav Yosef Karo, who authored the Shulchan Aruch, remarks that any sort of adhesion is necessarily a sign of a puncture, and that we may not try to remove the lung from the chest wall. We may not try and there's no way to check to remove it to check to see if it might not be punctured, unlike what Rabbeinu says here. And this is what is meant by halak bet Yosef. When we say halak bet Yosef, or that the wall is smooth in accordance with the position of the Bet Yosef, which was authored by Maran. So he said that there cannot be any check. So halak meaning that there are no adhesions whatsoever. According to Rabbeinu, that is not necessary. If we see an adhesion, we do this check to see that it might still be permitted. הריאה שנמצא בה מקום אטום כלשהו, שאין הרוח נכנסת בו ואינו נתפח, הרי זו כנקובה וטרפה. A lung which has a place that is kind of vacuumed, right, that is sealed, such that air cannot flow in, even just a little bit, and it doesn't expand, right? That when you take the lung and you blow into it, that area does not expand, meaning the air doesn't get there, then this is considered as if it is punctured, right? If it were punctured, it also wouldn't expand because if it were, or right, if it were a very large puncture, right? If there were a very large puncture, then also air would come out instead of expanding in the area. And so we say this is as if it is punctured, and we consider it a terefa. Now, this can also occur for many various reasons. There are various, like we said earlier, that pulmonary effusion is one of the primary diseases in the lungs. Another very common disease in the lungs is various obstructive lung diseases. Obstructive lung diseases are which obstruct the lungs, meaning they block the air pathways and don't allow for air to go through, such as chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD, also called emphysema, where air pockets might form in the lungs. And with these air pockets, also air cannot get through as they kind of seal the lungs. Okay. וכיצד בודקים אותה? How do we check? So we want to, how do we check to make sure that it is atum, right? Right. It's not to check to see if it's nekuva, right? Because we said there is no nekev here. There is no puncture here. It is atum. It is sealed, right? And because it is sealed, we consider it as if it is punctured. So how do we check to see that it is indeed sealed? ראינו מקום שלא נפתח בשעת נפיחה. אם נמצאת בו ליחה מותרת, שמחמת הליחה לא נכנסה שם הרוח. ואם לא נמצאת בו ליחה, נותנים עליו מעט רוק, אבן או כנף וכיוצא בהן, ונופחים אותה. אם נתנדנד, כשרה, ואם לאו, טרפה. Okay, so how do we check it? We rip the area that did not expand when it was blown into. If so, and then when we rip it open, if we find that in this area of the lung that was not expanding, if we find in it leha, like some sort of liquid, then it is permitted, meaning it's not a terefa, because we say that the air did not enter into that area of the lung because of the liquid that was there, right? So there was no problem with the lung itself, rather it was just a product of liquid that was there. If the liquid would be removed, then the lung would function properly. But if we don't find any leha there, any liquid, I mean, this could any type of fluid. It could be also mucus or anything like this, any type of fluid. If we don't find any fluid there, then we put on that area, we put a little bit of spit or straw or even a feather. That was the word. We put a feather or something like this, right? Anything that is like small and very light, and then we blow into the lung, right? So we take the trachea, we blow into it, and when we blow into it, the lung should expand. If the area in which we put this straw or feather or spit, right? If this area, if this item moves a little bit, right, it starts to shake, then it is kshera, right? Because if it's shaking, then that's a sign that that air is coming into that area. Because if there were no air coming in, then it wouldn't move those things. But since it is, then the hole that was produced because we ripped it open, so that's causing those things to move. And then we know that there is some air going through, and it's not sealed. And because it's not sealed, it wouldn't be considered as if it's punctured, and therefore it is valid. But if they do not move, then it is a terefa. because then we know for certain that no air is coming into there. הלכה ז' רעשת תשמע בה הברה כשנופחין אותה, אם ניכר המקום שממנו תשמע ההברה, מושיבין עליו רוק או תבן וכיוצא בו. אם נתנדנד, בידוע שהיא נקובה וטרפה. ואם לא ניכר המקום, מושיבין אותה במים פושרין ונופחין אותה. אם בקבק המים, טרפה. אם לאו, בידוע שקירום התחתון בלבד הוא של ניקב, והרוח תנהר בין שני הקירומות, ומפני זה יישמע בה קול דממה בשעת נפיחה. Okay. A lung that, sorry. By the way, here on the bottom, there's a picture here where you can see the lung being put in water and then it being blown into, which is relevant both for the previous halakha and for this halakha. A lung, which when blown into, a little like sound is heard, right? Right, and a little sound being heard seems to indicate that there is a puncture somewhere, right? That a little bit of air is coming out, like a flute, kind of, right? If it is recognizable where which area, which place, exact location of the lung in which we're hearing the little noise from there, right? If we can tell which area is causing the noise, then we put a little bit of spit or straw and anything else like that on that area. And then we blow. If when we blow, we see that it moves, then we know with certainty that it is punctured and therefore terefa, right? Because, right, the difference between this case and the previous case, which if it moved, then it was keshira, was in the previous case we ripped it open, right, to see that it wasn't sealed. Here we never touched it, right? So if there is a hole, that's a problem, right? So if it moves, then we know that there's a puncture there, and that's why it moved, because some air was released outwards towards the straw or the spit. But if we don't know where the place is, right, we couldn't identify where the sound is coming from, then what we do is we take the entire lung and we place it in lukewarm water, and then we blow into it. If, when we blow into it, the water starts to bubble, then it is a terefa, right? Because it's bubbling because some air is escaping from the hole in the lung. But if it doesn't bubble, then we know that it is only the lower membrane that was punctured, and right, that there is no puncture that goes all the way through the lung, because otherwise there would have been bubbles, right? So we see that the lung is sealed, and it's only the lower membrane that is punctured, and the air is going between the two membranes, and that is the sound that is heard at the time of the blowing. Right, so right, as we explained earlier, we saw that there were two membranes in the pleural sac. One was the visceral pleural, well, that's the lower one that's closer to the lung, and the other one is the parietal pleural, which is closer to the chest wall. Right. So here it's only the visceral pleura, which is punctured, and air goes in through that puncture into the pleural cavity, and that is the noise that is being heard. Now, I assume that this is the reason that some people do not want to explain that the qirum tahton is referring to the visceral pleura, since normally there is no air in the pleural cavity. Right, as we said before, the pleural cavity has fluid in it, and there is no air there. And if there is, that is a problem. Um, so I would note that in this case, what Rabbeinu was saying here is not that it normally has air in this area, right? It's not that air. When he says haruach tinhag ben shenei kerumot, he's not saying that that's normally the case. He's saying that this is only the case when it is the lower membrane that is punctured. Only in that case does air get into the pleural cavity between the two membranes, right? And yes, that is a problem, right? That is uh, that is an illness that can be very serious. Um, and it is something that can cause a pneumothorax. Pneumothorax can develop if air is allowed in, like into the pleural cavity, either through damage to the lung or damage to the chest wall. Right? If air gets into that area, uh, and then a pneumothorax is a collection of air that should not be in this area, right? If too much air gets in there, it can cause the lung to collapse, and that would be fatal, or could be fatal, right? Um, so this can cause disease, but it doesn't necessarily cause a pneumothorax. Um, right? So I think that this still is referring to the the visceral pleura, and uh, and that's how I understand this. Otherwise, I don't see how this halacha can be explained. הלכה ח' זה עיקר גדול יהיה בידך, שכל ריאה שנופחין אותה בפו שירין, ולא יבקבק המים, הרי היא שלמה מכל נקב. This is a large principle that you should hold on to. Any lung which, when blown into, when it is placed in lukewarm water, and when blown into does not cause bubbles in the water, this lung is a whole lung and is free from all punctures. Okay, Rabbeinu here tells us that this is a large principle that if you ever want to check to see if there's a puncture in the lung, you can do this test. And if there's no bubbles in the water, then it's with certainty that there is no puncture. הלכה ט' ריאה שנשפכה כקיטון, וקרום העליון שלה קיים שלם ולא נקב. אם הסימפונות עומדים במקומן ולא נמוחו, כשרה. ואם נמוח אפילו סימפון אחד, טרפה. Okay, a lung that is spilled like a qiton. Qiton, right? This is referring to some sort of a qiton. Literally means like a pitcher. What's what this means is that a lung that's been kind of liquefied, right? That it's been or it's some sort of illness. I think that this is referring to a lung abscess or uh, lung neurosis, which are a type of this is a type of liquefactive neurosis, which causes tissue to die and then pus to collect in that space. This is a type of disease that causes the lungs to kind of that causes the lung tissue to kind of die, okay, and even become a little liquidy. Brought a picture that you can see here. This is, for example, one, right? We can see here this lung abscess here in the middle. But note that Rabbeinu says ukrum ha'elyon shelah qayam, and it's up, right? So so the lung that is liquefied, that's like spilling, like the way that it would with a pitcher, but that the upper membrane of it is full and whole without any puncture, right? So that is clearly not the case I'm sorry. That's clearly not the case in this picture. Right here, we have a case of a neurosis of an abscess that does have a puncture in the upper limit and the upper membrane. Here's another case of a lung abscess. Here, it's not. There is no puncture, right? So this would be a case of what Rabbeinu was talking about. So there could be a lung abscess with a puncture, and there can be one without a puncture, right? So in our halacha, there is no puncture in the Qirum Elyon. If there were a puncture, then it would be terefa because there's a puncture. That would be clear. If there is no puncture, then if the bronchioles in the lung are still standing as they were, and they were not like melted, right? They weren't liquefied. Then the animal is kshera. But if even only one bronchiole were liquefied, then it is a terefa. Okay, that is the check to see if it is kshera or not. כיצד עושים? נוקבים אותה ושופכים אותה בכלי שהוא שבוע בעבר וכיוצא בו. אם נראה בה חוטים לבנים, בידוע שנימוק וסימפונות וטרפה. ואם לאו, בשר הריאה בלבד הוא שנימוק וכשרה. Okay, so what do? We puncture it and we spill the lung, right? Because the lung has become liquidy in this area, right? So we spill it into a utensil that is clear, right? That is like made of glass or something like this, right? Something that is transparent. If we see in the liquid, if we see white strings, right, which these white strings would be the bronchioles, right? This would be the simponoth. So then we know with certainty that the bronchioles have also like melted, have also liquefied, and it is a terefa. But if we don't see these white strings, then we say that it is only the flesh of the lung which has liquefied, and therefore it is kshera. הלכה ראה שנמצאו בה אבעבועות, אם היו מלאים רוח או מים זכים, או לחה הנמשכת כדבש וכיוצא בו, או לחה יבשה וקשה, אפילו כאבן, הרי זו מותרת. ואם נמצאת בהן לחה סירוחה, או מים סירוחין, או עכורין, הרי זו טרפה. וכשמוסיע לחה ובודק אותה, צריך לבדוק הסימפון שתחתיה. אם נמצא נקוב, טרפה. Okay. So here also we're introduced to something, another kind of disease. Avabu'ot are literally like bubbles. Okay? These refer to pulmonary bulbs. A bulb is a small collection of air between the lung and its outer surface, and the visceral pleura. You can see here a picture, for example. Okay, so here we see the lung, and here in the middle here we see a bu'a, a bubble, right? And this is This is called a bulb, right? And this bulb forms because either contains air or some sort of liquid, usually air, and right, and then it pressures up like this. Sometimes these bu'ot can rupture, right? And when one of them breaks, then air escapes also into the chest cavity, the chest wall, and causes a pneumothorax, like we said earlier, which is air in an area that it shouldn't be in, and that can cause the lung to collapse in cases of severe emphysema, right? So these bu'ot are dangerous if they rupture, but they aren't necessarily dangerous on their own. In addition, there could be a nekeb, a puncture that is under these bu'ot. So this is what we are now going to talk about and see. So a lung that we find in it many of these bulbs if the bulbs were filled with air or with clear water or with a fluid that flows like honey and something like this, I think that's referring to pus, right? Some sort of heavy liquid or heavy fluid that moves slowly like honey, right? I'm not certain, but I think this is referring to pus. Or a fluid that is dry and hard, even like a rock, right? Then this is permitted. But if we find in the bulb a fluid that is seruha, that smells bad, or water that smells bad, or is uh, very unclear, right? It's like grayish and it's not transparent, right? The word's escaping me right now, but that you can't see through the water, right? It looks very dark and like dirty. Then this is a terefa. And when we remove the fluid in order to check it, right? Because we need to puncture. How do we check this? We puncture the what is inside it, right? If it's air or some sort of fluid. So when we remove the fluid in order to check it, we also need to check the bronchiole that is under the bulb. If we see that the bronchiole under it has a puncture, then it is also terefa, right? Even if the water were fine, right? So if we puncture the bulb and we see that it has just air or clear water or something like this, which would make it fine, we have to also check to make sure that there's no puncture in the bronchiole under it. And if there is, then that is also terefa. הלכה י"א ריאה שנמצאו בה שני אבעבועות סמוכות זו לזו, טרפה, שהדבר קרוב הרבה שיש נקב ביניהן, ואין להן דרך בדיקה. היתה אחת ונראית כשתיים, נוקבין האחת. אם שפכה לה האחרת, אחת היא ומותרת. אם לאו, טרפה. Okay. A lung in which we find two bulbs together that are one next to the other, right? This can happen. This happens often that multiple bulbs form one next to the other, and sometimes they can even come together and form a bulla, which is a bulla is a type of is like a larger cyst. I mean, it's essentially the same as a bulb, just its size is larger. Right. So if there are two bulbs, one next to the other, then it is a terefa. Right. We can see this in the picture over here on the bottom left. We see the two bulbs, one next to the other, because and Rabbeinu says, and this is a terefa, since it is very common that there is a puncture is between them, and there is no way to check this, right? So here, for example, where this arrow is, so there's a puncture here at the area where the two bulbs come together. And there's no way to check this since the bulbs are covering the puncture, and you can't check it because just by removing it, it would also puncture. You can't check that, and it's something that happens often. So as soon as we have two together, we say automatically that it is a terefa. If there were one that looks like two, right, so here is the one that looks like two, meaning that they've kind of come together and formed one larger bulb, as I said earlier, one larger bulla, as I said earlier. So now what we do is we puncture one of them. If we see that the fluid or the air that is in one of them flows into the other, then we say that they're actually one, right? Because the fluid flows from one to the other, so they're actually one because there's one cavity. But and then it is permitted. But if it does not flow from one to the other, then we consider them as two separate bulbs, and it would therefore be terefa, like we said earlier in the halacha. הנחה י"ב, הריאה שנתמסמסה טרפה, a lung that has melted, right? I mean, not really melted, but has totally decomposed, right? It was like been destroyed or something like this. It is terefa. How kesad כרון שנמצאת שלמה וכשתולין אותה תחתך ותיפול חתיכות חתיכות. Right? How so? So what are we talking about when we're talking about this melted lung? So such as if we were to find it to be totally whole, right? We see a whole lung, but then if we were to hang it up by hang it up onto something, then it would fall apart and like pieces would just fall, right? So it's so decomposed that pieces would just start falling off from it, right? It would crack and just fall apart. So this is called a ריאה שנתמסמסה, and this is terefa. ריאה שנמצאת נקובה במקום שיד הטבח ממשמשת בו, מותרת. ותולים בידו ואומרים, מיד הטבח נקבה אחר השחיטה. נמצא הנקב במקום אחר, ואין ידוע אם קודם שחיטה נקב או אחר שחיטה, נוקבים בה נקב אחר ומדמין, כשם שעושים בבני מעיים. Okay, a lung that a puncture was found in it, in the place that the butcher normally moves his hand to check it. So this is permitted, right? So as I said, so normally the butcher needs to check in the lung to see if there are any adhesions, right? As we said in the previous halacha, and if there are adhesions, then he needs to check to see if there is a puncture, right? So what he normally does is he takes his hand and he rubs it along the rib cage, right, where it connects with the lung, to see if he feels any adhesions, right, and that's how he knows to check, right. So if while he's doing this, so he has a certain location where he does this, right? If you then look at this location and you find that there is a puncture in the place that the butcher moved his hand, then this is permitted because we presume that the puncture occurred because of his hand, that he caused the puncture while he checked after he had already slaughtered it, and that's why it is permitted. If, however, we find a puncture in a different place, right, meaning not in the or in a different place, not in the place that he normally moves his hand, and we don't know if this puncture was caused prior to the slaughter or if it was after the slaughter that was punctured, then what we do is we do a puncture in a separate place, and we see and we compare them, just like we do regarding the intestines, which we saw in the previous chapter, right? Meaning we make another puncture and we look and we compare the two punctures. If they look the same, then we say that it occurred after the slaughter, since they look the same. But if they don't look the same, then you can tell the difference between a puncture that is made after the slaughter and a puncture that is made before slaughter, and therefore we would say it's a terefa. לחיות ג' ואין מדמין מריאה של לבהמה דקה לריאה של לבהמה גסה, אלא מדקה לדקה. ומגסה לגסה. Okay. And when we do this comparison, we do not compare between a lung from a small animal, right, like a sheep, right, or something like this, to the lung of a thick animal, like an ox. Rather, we compare from a small animal to a small animal, or from a thick animal to a thick animal, right? We do comparisons that are actually similar. נמצא הנקב באחד מן הבעבועות, הרי זו טרפה, ואין אומרים נכתוב אבעבוע אחר ונערוך, שאין הדבר ניכר. Okay. If, however, we found a puncture that was inside one of these bulbs, right, one of these bubbles, then we say that this is a terefa, right? And we don't say, let's make a puncture uh, in another bulb and compare and see if maybe they look the same or they don't look the same, because this is something that you can't tell the difference between uh, a puncture in a bulb that happened before slaughter and a puncture in a bulb that happened after slaughter. As I said earlier, I'm not sure how even forget the bulb, a puncture in just a regular puncture, how the puncture would look different if it were done before the slaughter or after the slaughter. I'm not sure how that would look different, and that is something that I guess one has to really be able to tell us. הנחה י"ד, מחט שנמצאת בריאה, נהופכין אותה, אם לא יצא ממנה רוח, בידוע שזאת המחט דרך סימפונות נכנסה ולא נקבה, ואם נתחתכה הריאה קודם נפיחה, ונמצאת בה המחט, הרי זו אסורה. והדבר קרוב הרבה שנקבה כשנכנסה. A needle that is found inside the lungs. What do we do regarding it? We blow the lung, and if no air exited from the lung, right, meaning you didn't hear any, or you didn't feel any or hear any air exiting from some hole, then we know with certainty, since there's no puncture, we know with certainty that this needle or this nail entered through the bronchioles into the lung, and that it didn't pierce and puncture the lung. But if the lung were cut, right, if it had some cuts prior to us blowing into the lung, and we found the nail inside it, then this animal is prohibited, since most likely what happened is that it pierced and punctured when it entered into the lung. חט"ו, תולעת שהייתה בריאה ונקבה ויסעה, והרי הריאה נקובה בתולעת, הרי זו מותרת, חזקתה שאחר שחיטה תקרוב ותסה. A worm, right? This is referring to like a tapeworm, right? That is living in the lungs or something like this, right? A worm that was in the lung and punctured and then left the lung, right? So it's inside the lung and then it punctured the lung and left it, and then ended up being that the lung were punctured because of the worm. This is permitted, since the presumption is that it is only after the slaughter that the worm punctured and left the lung. Right. We say it's normally after the puncture, after the slaughter, the lung cools down, right, and then most likely is when the worm leaves the lung. יש שם מראות, שאם נשתנה מראה העבר לאותו המראה הרע, הרי הוא כנקוב, שאותו הבשר שנשתנה מראיו למראה זה, כמת הוא חשוב, וכאילו אותו הבשר הנהפך עינו, אינו מסוי. Okay, there are some appearances, right, or colors, that if the then this is referring to any organ, not just the lung, that if an organ changed its appearance to that same bad appearance, right, that it looks bad, then this is considered as if it is punctured, right? Meaning the change of the color is sufficient to say that it is as if it is punctured. Since that same flesh that changes its appearance to this other appearance is considered as if the flesh is dead. And because it's dead, it's as if that same flesh whose very matter changed, we consider it as if it doesn't even exist, right? As if it were removed, right? Since it's like dead flesh. וכן הוא אומר, ומחיית בשר חי בסעת, וביום הראות בו בשר חי, מכלל ששאר הבשר שנשתנה אינו חי. And so too, the verse says, this is regarding a sara'at, right? The various skin ailments that cause a human to be considered mitzvah or have a leprosy or something like this, right? These are halachot in different sections of the Mishne Tora, which we will see later. So the pasuk says, and there is a patch of live flesh together with the se'et. The se'et is the area that is infected, right? Right, the area that is white and has changed color and is infected in the skin. Right, so it says a patch of live flesh is together with that, and so too, and on the day in which live flesh is seen, right? Since we see that the healthy skin is called live flesh, Mikilal, from here we can see that the rest of the flesh that changes its color, right, the se'et, is not considered live, right? Since the healthy skin is called live flesh, then the unhealthy skin, by deduction, would be dead skin or dead flesh. ראה שנשתנו מראיה בין מראה כולה בין מקצתה, אם נשתנית למראה המותר, אפילו נשתנית כולה מותרת, ואם משתנית למראה האסור, אפילו כלשהו טרפה, שמראה האסור כנקב הוא חשוב כמו שבארנו. A lung whose color changes, whether the entire right, whose appearance changes, or whether the entire appearance of the lung, right, meaning the whole surface of the lung changes, or even just a little part of the lung changes, right? If it changed to an appearance that is permitted, even if the entire lung changed, it is still permitted. And if it changed to the color that is prohibited, even just a little bit, then it is a terefa, because the color that is prohibited is considered as if it is a puncture, right? Just as we explained, right? And since it's considered as a puncture, then even just a small puncture is prohibited, as we saw earlier. Now, Rabbeinu will give the list of colors or appearances that are considered prohibited. וחמש מראות אסורות יש בריאה, אלו הן שחורה או ירוקה כעין הקישוט, או כעין חלמון בשר, או כעין חריה, או כמראה הבשר. וחריה הוא הסמך שצובעים בו הבגדים, והוא דומה לשערות אדומות מעט ונוטות לירוקה. And there are 5 appearances or 5 colors that are prohibited in the lung. And these are they. If it is black like ink, or if it is green, or yarok can mean green, but it can also mean like yellow or greenish yellow color. But if it is green like keshut, in modern Hebrew we call keshut like hops, like the plant hops that is used also for brewing beer and other things like this. We call that keshut, and it also has this green color. Though the Yochai Makbili version here, they think that cuscuta plant is what is being referred to here. I don't know to say which one is correct, but that is those are two plants that have a very similar greenish tint. Or so that's two. Three, if it's like the yolk of an egg, right? So like a yellowish color. Or four, if it is like a haria, which is a safflower. A safflower is a type of plant that has seeds that are used for very popular today to make vegetable oil. So they're bred commercially for that. Or fifth, uh, if they are uh, like the color of flesh, right? Flesh being like reddish, brownish, right? The color of meat. Um, Now Rabbeinu adds regarding the haria, regarding the safflower, that this is a plant that is also used to dye clothing, and it is very similar to, it looks like hair, like little reddish hairs, but it also has a tinge to it that looks a little green, but somewhere between greenish reddish, something like that. הלכה י"ח נמצאת כעין חריות של לדקל, אוסרין אותה מספק, שזה קרוב למראה האסור. Okay, if we find the lung is the color of the branches of the palm tree, right? So very much like the lulav that we see, right? Which has like this green color, right? So then we prohibit it. We say it's prohibited out of doubt because that's very close to the colors that we said are prohibited. בכל המראות האלו אין אוסרים בהן עד שנופחין אותה וממרס בה בידו. אם משתנית למראה המותר, מותרת, ואם עמדה בעיניה, אסורה. Okay, all of these prohibited colors that we said, we don't prohibit it until we blow into the lung and we kind of rub it with our hands. Right? All this to try and like give it life, right? If when we do these things, its color changes back to the color that is permitted, then it is permitted, right? So if we see that it is black like ink, and then when we blow into it and rub it a little bit, it goes back to its normal color, its pinkish color. That's the color of the of the lung. Or if it goes to any color that's permitted, as we'll see in the next halacha, then it is permitted. But if it remains in its same color, meaning the same black, for instance, then it is prohibited. הלכה י"ט 4 מראות מותרות יש בריאה, ואלו הן שחורה ככחל, או ירוקה כחציר, או אדומה, או כמראה הכבד. There are 4 prohibited colors or appearances that are in the lung, and these are they. First, if it is shehora kohal. Kohal is like this dark blue, right? Like the word kahol, right? Which means blue in modern Hebrew. So here it's like this dark blue tinge. And when it says black, Rabbeinu does shehora, he doesn't mean black really. He means like very dark, right? Shehora, he just means dark. And dark blue can be very dark, very close to black, right? So if it's very dark, like dark blue, or if it is green, like hasir. Hasir is leek, like a vegetable. Or if it is a red, it's 3. And 4, if it looks like the liver. The liver is also kind of red, but a little bit like reddish, brownish. ואפילו הייתה הריאה כולה תלאים תלאים, נקודות נקודות מארבע מראות אלו, הרי זו מותרת. Right? And even if the entire lung was made up of these little spots and dots that were composed of these 4 colors, it is still permitted, right? Like that would, like a person might think that that looks like it's ill and it would be terefa, but the halakha is that no, it doesn't matter. Even if it has a lot of dots like that and whatever, it still is considered permitted. הלכה כ' עוף שנפל לאור והוריק ליבו או כבדו או קורקבנו או שהדימו המעיים שלו בכל שהוא, הרי זו טרפה. וכל הירוקים שהדימו והאדומים שהוריקו מחמת האור בעוף, הרי הן כמי שנטלו וטרפה. והוא שיעמדו במראה זה אחר ששולחים אותן מעט וממארסים בהן. Okay. So a bird that falls into a fire and its heart or its liver or its gizzard became green, right? All of these three organs, their normal color is kind of reddish, right? So if they fell into fire and then if it fell into fire and then one of these three turned green, or if its intestines, which are normally green, right, and this green is like a greenish yellow, right? And if the intestines, which are normally green, turn red, right? So either the red turn green or the green turn red, and even just a little bit in any of these, then this is considered a terefa. Because anything that is normally green that turns red, or anything that is normally red that turns green because of fire, in the case of a bird, these are considered as if they were removed and are a terefa. Nitula is another one of the 8 forms of terefot, as we saw in the beginning of chapter 5. And even though in this perek we're dealing with nekuva, with the terefa that is about puncturing, since Rabbeinu just finished talking about the changing of colors in organs that are considered as if they are punctured, so he saw fit to bring this case also next to it, because here also we're talking about changing colors, even though in the bird they are considered to be netula and not nekuva. They're considered to be removed and not considered to be punctured. So these are considered as if they're removed and they are a terefa. But this is so long as they remain in that same color after we take that organ and we boil it in water just a little bit and shake it a little bit, right? So if we were to take the heart, which is normally red but turned green, we boil it a little bit and shake it a little bit, and then it remains green, then it is a terefa. But if it changed back to being red, then it is permitted. הלכה כ"א, כל עוף שנמצאת כבד שלו כמראה בני מעיו, או שנשתנו שאר בני מעיו, ועמדו בשינוים אחר שליקה ומריסה, כמו שבארנו, וידוע שנפל לאור ונחמרו בני מעיו, וטרפה. Okay. Any bird that we find that its liver is like the color of the intestines, right? Meaning that we see a liver that's greenish, or that its intestines changed and changed to red and remained in the changed color after it has been boiled and like played with a little bit, as we just explained in the previous halakha, right? So in the previous halakha we saw the bird fall into the fire. Here we didn't see the bird fall into the fire. We just find the organs and we see that they changed color. So now biyadua, it is certain that they fell into the fire and its intestines were burnt and therefore is a terefa, right? Meaning, so if we don't know regarding these we don't know regarding this bird if it fell into the fire, but we see that they behave in this way, so then we assume that it fell into a fire and was burnt, and that's why it is behaving this way. ולא עוד, אלא בני מעיים של העוף שלא נמצא בהם שינוי, וכשנשלקו, נשתנו והוריקו האדומים, بيذوع شنفل أور ونحمرو بنمعاv وترفع. Moreover, if the intestines of the bird, we find that they didn't have any change, meaning so that they were green, right? And then the intestines and the liver were boiled together, and then the red, meaning the liver, right? Because the liver is red and the intestines are green, and the green, and as we said, the intestines did not change colors, right? So, and then the liver, which are red, turn green as a product of this boiling together with the intestines. Then we know with certainty that also it fell into a fire and that its intestines were burnt, and it is considered a terefa, meaning that because of the intestines, even though they remained green, but because since they caused the red to change to green, from here we can see that they were burnt. וכן הוושט שנמצא האור החיצון שלו לבן והפנימי אדום, בין בעוף בין בבהמה, הרי זה כאילו אינו וטרפה. And so too the esophagus, which right, as we said earlier in one of the earlier chapters, we explained regarding the esophagus that it is that it has two membranes, right? One membrane which is pink, and another membrane which is white, right? The inner one is white and the outer one is pink. Right. So if we find in the esophagus that the inner one is that the outer one is white and the inner one is pink or red, right? Meaning the other way than it should be, regardless of whether it's in the bird or if it's in the domesticated animal, this is also as if it doesn't exist, as if it's removed and considered a terefa. With that, we conclude chapter